When the morning light slipped through the kitchen window, I knew today wouldn't be a peaceful morning. The coffee machine sputtered behind me, filling the air with the sharp scent of burnt grounds. I wrapped my hands around my mug, trying to steady the tremor in my fingers, hoping Mark wouldn't notice. But I knew he would. I'm Emily, and this is a true Reddit revenge story you won't forget. Mark stood across the kitchen, arms folded, leaning against the counter like a judge waiting to pass sentence. He was still in his gray sweatpants, hair a mess, but his eyes were sharp, scanning me like he could see every doubt I tried to hide. "Samantha called again last night," he said, voice cold, almost casual. My stomach tightened. I stared into my coffee, watching the steam swirl. "I know, she needs help, Laura. She can't pay her rent and she's behind on her car payment. She just needs a little help until her next paycheck." I looked up, meeting his eyes. "We've been helping her for months, Mark." His jaw tightened, the muscle pulsing under the rough stubble on his face. "She's my sister." I took a deep breath. "And I understand that, but she's 34 years old. She needs to learn to take care of herself." His eyes darkened and he pushed off the counter, moving closer. I could feel the tension radiating from him like the static before a lightning strike. "She's family, Laura. We help family." I forced myself to stay calm. "We've paid her credit card bills. We've covered her rent. We bought her groceries. And now she's asking for my credit card." "No, Mark. I can't do that." His hands clenched at his sides. "Can't or won't?" I swallowed hard, setting my coffee mug down on the table so he wouldn't see how my hands shook. "Won't." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Mark's face flushed. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're being selfish. You don't understand what it means to be responsible for someone else." I felt a sting in my chest at his words, but I lifted my chin. "I understand responsibility, Mark. We have bills too. We have a mortgage, utilities, our own future to think about." His nostrils flared. "Samantha could lose her car, Laura. She could lose her apartment. And what about us?" My voice cracked, but I didn't look away. "What happens when we can't pay our own bills because we keep bailing her out?" Mark stepped back, pacing, running a hand through his hair in frustration. The floor creaked under his weight, a harsh sound in the quiet morning. I watched him, my heart pounding, waiting for the explosion I felt coming. He turned, eyes blazing. "You're really going to let my sister end up on the street because you're too stubborn to help?" I stood up, crossing my arms to keep them from trembling. "She's not going to end up on the street, Mark. She needs to learn to manage her own life." His laughter was sharp, humorless. "You think you know everything, don't you?" I shook my head slowly. "Number. But I know we can't keep living like this." For a moment, I thought I saw something shift in his eyes, a softness, a crack in the anger. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by something darker, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Mark's eyes dropped to the coffee mug sitting on the counter next to him. His hand moved toward it, fingers wrapping around the handle, knuckles white. I didn't move. Mark lifted his gaze, and for a brief moment, our eyes locked. His jaw tightened, and I saw the flicker of rage I had never seen before, sparking behind his eyes. His jaw tightened, and I saw the muscle flicker under his skin as he lifted the mug. I didn't look away. My heart hammered so hard I thought he might hear it, but I kept my arms crossed, refusing to back down. "Put it down, Mark," I said, my voice low. His grip on the mug tightened, and for a second I thought he would listen. But then his eyes darkened, and I saw his lips press into a hard, thin line. "You think you can disrespect me in my own house?" he snapped. "This isn't about respect, Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about boundaries." He stepped closer, holding the mug's steam still rising from the coffee inside. The smell filled the air, mixing with the scent of burnt toast from the breakfast I had abandoned. I stepped back, bumping into the edge of the counter, but I kept my eyes on him. I wouldn't let him see the fear rising in my chest. "Boundaries," he scoffed. "You think you get to have boundaries while my sister suffers?" "I think we both do," I whispered. His eyes flashed, and before I could react, he lifted the mug and threw the coffee straight at me. The hot liquid hit my face and chest, and I screamed as the burning pain spread across my skin. The coffee dripped from my chin, soaking into my shirt, scalding my skin beneath the fabric. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair, clutching at my face as the pain seared through me. Tears mixed with the coffee and my breath came in ragged gasps. I looked up at him and for a moment I saw shock in his eyes. His mouth opened like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. The mug slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor, coffee splashing against the cabinets and dripping down onto the tile. I pressed my hand to my cheek, feeling the burn, the sting, the betrayal. "You did this," I whispered. His face twisted, anger replacing the fleeting guilt. "If you had just listened, Laura, this wouldn't have happened." My vision blurred as the pain throbbed against my skin. I could barely hear him over the pounding in my ears. I took a deep breath, forcing the air into my lungs, forcing myself to stand up straight. "I'm done," I said, my voice trembling but clear. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You're not going anywhere." I wiped the coffee from my eyes, tasting the bitterness on my lips. I stepped around the broken mug, careful not to cut my feet on the shards, and grabbed my phone from the table. "What are you doing?" he demanded. I didn't answer. My fingers shook as I unlocked the screen, scrolling to the number I had saved weeks ago, just in case. "Put that phone down, Laura," he growled, stepping closer. I pressed the call button. 911. "What's your emergency?" The dispatcher's voice came through the speaker. "My husband just threw hot coffee on me," I said, my voice breaking. "I need help." Mark's face went pale. His eyes darted to the door, then back to me. "What the hell are you doing? Send someone, please," I said into the phone, ignoring him. The dispatcher asked for my address and I gave it, my voice shaking, the words tumbling out between breaths. Mark took another step toward me, his hand reaching out like he could pull the words back, erase what he had done. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. I looked at him, the man I once loved, and felt nothing but the burn on my skin and the heaviness in my chest. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line. I could already hear the faint sound of sirens in the distance growing closer. "You did this, Mark," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head, his hands dropping to his sides, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. The sirens grew louder, echoing through the quiet neighborhood, and I took a step back, clutching the phone like a lifeline. If you were me, what would you have done? Have you ever been in a situation like this? Share in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. As the red and blue lights flashed through the kitchen window, Mark turned toward the door, his shoulders tense, ready to run. And in that moment, I knew everything was about to change forever. I didn't have time to move before the hot coffee splashed across my face. The burn was instant, sharp and biting, making me suck in a breath that caught in my throat. The liquid ran down my neck, soaking into my shirt, sticking the fabric to my skin. My eyes stung and tears mixed with the coffee dripping onto the floor. The mug hit the ground, shattering pieces, skittering across the tile, echoing in the silence that followed. For a moment, I couldn't move. My hands hovered in the air before pressing against my cheek, feeling the heat radiate through my skin. My breath came in short, panicked gasps, and my heart pounded so loudly it drowned out everything else. Mark stood there, his hands still outstretched, eyes wide like he couldn't believe what he had just done. "You shouldn't have pushed me, Laura," he said, his voice shaking, trying to sound calm. I stepped back, feeling the coffee seep into my jeans, the heat burning against my skin, but all I could focus on was the look in his eyes. The anger wasn't gone. It was still there, simmering under the shock. I turned and ran, nearly slipping on the coffee pooling on the floor, pushing past the chair that had fallen sideways. I stumbled down the hallway, my feet barely feeling the ground beneath me as I made it to the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind me. I pressed the lock with shaking fingers, leaning against the door as tears fell, mixing with the coffee still dripping from my hair. In the mirror, I saw myself. My hair was plastered to my forehead, coffee streaking down my face, eyes red and swollen, skin flushed and starting to blister on my cheek. I touched the burn, hissing at the pain, pulling my hand back quickly. The woman in the mirror looked like a stranger, broken, scared, and alone. What am I doing with my life? Mark's footsteps pounded down the hallway, stopping outside the bathroom door. He rattled the handle, pounding once with his fist. "Open the door, Laura," he shouted. "Don't act like this is my fault." I backed away, pressing against the sink, trying to steady my breathing, but the fear rose in my chest like a wave threatening to drown me. "Laura, open this door right now," Mark demanded, slamming his hand against it again, making it rattle in its frame. I shook my head even though he couldn't see me. My hands moved to the countertop, gripping the edge so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Open the door and we'll talk about this," he yelled, but his voice wasn't calm anymore. It was sharp, angry, a sound I had heard too many times before. I looked down at the sink, coffee dripping onto the porcelain, mixing with my tears. The pain pulsed against my cheek, reminding me of what he had done, what he was capable of. I glanced at my phone on the counter, the screen lighting up with a message from Julie, but I ignored it. My hand hovered over it, shaking as Mark hit the door again. "Laura, don't make me break this door down," he growled. My fingers closed around the phone, pressing the emergency call button, my thumb hovering over the screen. My breath caught, fear freezing me in place. Then I heard Mark slam his hand against the door again, harder this time, the sound echoing in the small bathroom. I pressed the call button. 911. "What is your emergency?" A calm voice answered. I took a breath, my voice trembling as I spoke. "My husband threw hot coffee on me. I'm burned. I need help." The dispatcher's calm voice guided me through the chaos. "Can you tell me your address?" she asked. I gave it to her, the words shaking as they left my lips. I could hear Mark pacing outside the door, his heavy steps moving back and forth across the hallway. "Is he still there with you?" the dispatcher asked. "Yes," I whispered, pressing a hand to my burning cheek. "Help is on the way, Laura. Stay on the line with me." I nodded even though she couldn't see me. My eyes flickered to the mirror again, seeing the redness on my skin, the pain twisting with fear in my eyes. Mark pounded on the door harder this time, the frame rattling. "Who are you talking to in there?" he shouted. I didn't answer. I pressed my back against the wall, sliding down to the floor, my knees pulled up to my chest. The cold tiles felt sharp against my skin, but it was nothing compared to the burn on my face. "Laura, open this door," Mark yelled again, anger rising in his voice. I heard the dispatcher's voice in my ear, calm and steady. "Stay where you are. Officers are close." I closed my eyes, focusing on her words, letting them anchor me in that small space. Every sound seemed louder, the dripping of water from the sink, my breath, the pounding of Mark's fist. Then everything went quiet. I opened my eyes, listening, the silence louder than the shouting had been. Laura, Mark's voice came softer now, a fake calm that made my skin crawl. "Come on, let's just talk about this." I stayed silent, clutching the phone tighter, pressing it against my ear like it could protect me. "Laura, don't do this to us," he pleaded. I closed my eyes again, letting the tears fall. Us. There was no us anymore. Outside, I heard the faint sound of sirens in the distance, growing louder, cutting through the quiet like a promise. "Laura, what's that?" Mark asked, his voice shifting, panic rising. I didn't answer. I stayed pressed against the wall, listening as the sirens came closer, the dispatcher's voice reminding me to stay where I was. Then I heard it, the screech of tires outside, the crackle of radios, the heavy footsteps on the porch. A loud knock came from the front door. "Police, open up." Mark's footsteps moved away from the bathroom, and I heard him shout, "This is a misunderstanding." The dispatcher's voice was calm. "Officers are at your door now, Laura. Stay where you are." I hugged my knees tighter, shaking, listening to the muffled voices outside the bathroom. "Sir, step back." "I didn't do anything, she's overreacting." Mark's voice rose, anger pushing back against his fear. The voices moved to scuffle, something heavy hitting the floor. I heard Mark curse, yelling something I couldn't understand. The dispatcher spoke again, calm and steady. "They have him, Laura. You're safe now." Safe. The word felt heavy, unreal, like it belonged to someone else. I slowly stood up, my legs trembling, and unlocked the bathroom door. It creaked open, the hallway, empty, coffee stains leading down the hall toward the living room. I stepped out, the air heavy with the smell of burnt coffee and fear. As I reached the end of the hallway, I saw Mark on the floor, handcuffed, 2 officers standing over him. His eyes met mine, wide, angry and afraid. "This isn't over, Laura," he shouted, his voice cracking. The officer nearest to him shook his head. "Sir, you need to stop talking." I stood there holding my phone, breathing hard, the burn on my cheek pulsing with every beat of my heart. Outside, the flashing lights from the police cars lit up the morning, red and blue dancing across the walls of the living room. I took a breath, tasting the bitterness of coffee and fear on my tongue. The officer turned to me, his voice calm. "Ma'am, you're safe now." I didn't feel safe, not yet, but I nodded. The sirens faded into the morning, the cold air from the open door rushing in, and for a moment I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. What would you have done if you were me? Have you ever been in a situation like this? Share in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. As Mark was lifted from the floor and led out of the house, his eyes locked on mine one last time, and I saw it. Fear. The fear that this time I wasn't going to take him back. The fear that I was finally done. The fear that he had lost control. And as the door closed behind him, the lights still flashing, I heard the sound that would change everything. The police sirens faded, leaving the house in silence. And I stood there alone with the sound of my breath and the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. When the police stepped into the house, I saw Mark step back, fear flashing across his face for the first time. The two officers, both in dark uniforms, scanned the room quickly. Their eyes landed on the broken mug pieces scattered across the kitchen floor, the dark stains of coffee seeping into the cracks of the tiles. I stood by the hallway, one hand clutching my phone, the other pressed gently against the burn on my cheek. The pain pulsed in steady waves, but I forced myself to stand tall. "Ma'am, are you okay?" one of the officers asked, his voice calm but firm. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out at first. My eyes darted to Mark, who stood frozen, his hands lifted slightly like he was ready to argue. "She's overreacting," Mark said quickly, his voice high and shaky. "It was an accident." The officer raised a hand, stopping him. "Sir, we'll speak with you in a moment." The officer turned back to me, his eyes kind but serious. "Can you tell us what happened, ma'am?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry, the words heavy on my tongue. I glanced at Mark, who shook his head slowly, silently warning me to stay quiet. I looked back at the officer, feeling the weight of years pressing on my chest. Years of silence, of pretending everything was fine, of making excuses. He threw coffee on me, I said, my voice low but clear. "Because I wouldn't give him my credit card." Mark let out a harsh laugh, stepping forward. "She's lying." "I didn't mean to." "Sir, step back," the second officer said, moving between Mark and me. I pressed my hand harder against my cheek, wincing at the pain, but I kept going. "He was angry," I continued, my voice trembling. "Because I wouldn't give him what he wanted." The first officer nodded, glancing at my face, then back at Mark. "Ma'am, do you need medical attention?" I shook my head quickly. "No, I just want him to leave." The second officer turned to Mark. "Sir, turn around and put your hands behind your back." Mark's eyes widened and he stumbled back. "No, wait, you don't understand, this is my house." The officer stepped forward. "Now, sir." Mark's face twisted, a mix of anger and fear as he turned, placing his hands behind his back. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed in the kitchen louder than any argument we had ever had. I let out a breath. I didn't know I was holding my shoulders slumping as the tension in the room shifted. My eyes followed Mark as the officers led him toward the door. "Laura, please," he pleaded, twisting to look at me, his eyes desperate. "Don't do this. We can fix this." I didn't say a word. I pressed my hand to the burn on my cheek, feeling the heat, the pain, the reality of what had just happened. As the officers opened the front door, the cold morning air rushed in, and I saw neighbors standing on their porches watching as Mark was led out in handcuffs. His eyes met mine one last time, and I saw it there, clear as day. He was scared. I felt fear in that moment too, a deep, shaking fear of what I had just done, of what would come next. But beneath that fear there was something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. I stood there watching as Mark was guided down the steps, his head turning, searching for something to hold onto. The neighbors stared, their eyes wide, whispering to each other from behind half-closed doors. I saw Mrs. Peterson across the street, clutching her robe tighter around her, shaking her head slowly. I hugged my arms around myself, feeling the cold air hit the wet patches on my shirt, the sting on my cheek reminding me that this was real. An officer stayed with me, a younger woman with dark hair pulled back tight, her eyes kind but firm. "Ma'am, can we sit down for a moment?" she asked. I nodded, my legs suddenly heavy, and we moved to the small couch in the living room, the one Mark and I used to sit on during movie nights, pretending everything was normal. She pulled out a small notepad and clicked her pen. I'm Officer Ramirez. Can you tell me everything that happened this morning? I took a deep breath, the scent of coffee still hanging in the air mixing with the cold breeze from the open door. He wanted my credit card. I started, my voice quiet, my eyes on the coffee-stained floor. He's been asking for weeks for his sister. I paused, feeling the tears gather again, but I blinked them away. When I told him no, he got angry. I continued, my voice steadying. He yelled, I yelled, and then I touched my cheek again, feeling the burn throb under my fingers. He threw the coffee on me. I finished. Officer Ramirez nodded slowly, writing down notes, her eyes flicking up to meet mine. And has he ever hurt you before, Laura? I hesitated, the truth sitting heavy on my tongue. The shouting, the slammed doors, the threats whispered in the dark. No, not like this, I whispered. She nodded again. You did the right thing calling us. I know this is a lot right now, but we can connect you with a local center for women who've experienced domestic violence. They can help you find somewhere safe to stay. Somewhere safe. The words felt strange, like they belonged to someone else's story. But deep down, I knew they needed to be part of mine. I don't have anywhere to go, I admitted, the words tasting bitter. Officer Ramirez offered a small smile. You're not alone in this, Laura. There's help. She handed me a card with the number of a local shelter in Portland, a place I'd never thought I would need. Thank you, I said, softly clutching the card like it was the last solid thing I had. The officers finished taking photos of the broken mug, the coffee splatters, and the redness on my face. The camera shutter clicked, each sound pulling me further away from the life I thought I was living. They asked if I wanted medical attention again, but I shook my head, too tired to move, too tired to feel. After they left, the house felt empty, too quiet, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I walked through the kitchen, stepping carefully around the shards of ceramic, picking up the pieces of the mug Mark had thrown. I placed them in a small trash bag, each piece heavier than it should have been. I looked around the house, seeing the photos on the walls, the couch, the small table by the door where we kept our keys. All of it felt wrong now. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found her name. Julie. My fingers hovered for a moment, fear and shame twisting in my stomach, but I pressed the call button. She answered on the second ring. Laura. Her voice, warm and familiar, cracked something inside me. Julie, I whispered, my voice shaking. I need help. There was a pause, and I heard her take a breath. Where are you? I looked around the house, at the mess, at the silence, at the memories. At home, I said. I'm coming, she replied, firm and clear. Have you ever been in a situation like this? Share in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. As I ended the call and placed the phone on the table, I turned to look at the door, the last light of morning streaming in. And I knew as I reached out to close it that I would never step back into this house again. Julie opened the door and pulled me into a hug, and the tears finally came. They spilled down my face, mixing with the cold air clinging to my skin as I pressed my forehead against her shoulder. For a moment, I let myself collapse into her, feeling the warmth of someone who saw me, really saw me for the first time in so long. Laura, it's okay, Julie whispered, rubbing circles on my back. You're safe now. The word safe made my chest tighten. I wanted to believe it, but my mind kept flashing back to the kitchen, the coffee burning my skin. Mark's eyes full of anger. She guided me inside, closing the door behind us. The small hallway smelled like cinnamon and clean laundry, so different from the heavy air at my house. Sit down, Julie said, leading me to her couch, soft and worn with a blanket tossed across the back. I sat, clutching the small duffel bag I had managed to pack. A few clothes, my toothbrush, the photo of my parents I kept in the top drawer of my nightstand. Do you want some tea? She asked. I shook my head, unable to speak, wiping my eyes with the sleeve of my sweatshirt. She sat beside me, her presence calm, her hand resting on mine. Laura, talk to me, she said softly. Tell me everything. The words tumbled out rough and broken. I told her about the coffee, about the shouting, about the fear that had taken over every part of me. I told her how I called 911, how the officers took him away, how I stood there as the neighbors watched. Julie didn't interrupt. She listened, her eyes never leaving mine, nodding, squeezing my hand when I stumbled over the words. When I finished, I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. The silence that followed felt different, like something heavy had lifted, even if only for a moment. You did the right thing, Julie said, her voice steady. You did what you had to do. I wiped at the tears still clinging to my lashes. I don't know what to do now. She squeezed my hand again. You're going to get help, Laura. You're going to start over. I looked at her, fear rising in my chest. How he'll come after me, Julie. He'll try to control everything again. Then we'll make sure he can't, she said, determination flashing in her eyes. She stood up, walked to the kitchen, and returned with a business card. She placed it in my hand. Olivia Sanders, Julie said. She's a lawyer, and she helped my cousin when she went through something similar. She knows what she's doing. I stared at the card, the letters blurring through my tears. She'll help you file for a restraining order, Julie continued. She'll help you start the divorce, protect your accounts, everything. I looked at Julie, her face kind but firm, and for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt a small spark of hope. Okay, I whispered, clutching the card to my chest. You're not alone, Laura, she said, sitting back down beside me. You're not alone in this. The next morning, I stood in front of Olivia Sanders' office, clutching Julie's hand. The building was small, tucked between a coffee shop and a nail salon, a blue door with her name etched in gold letters. My heart pounded as I took a breath and pushed the door open. Inside, it smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner, calm and warm. A woman at the front desk smiled and told us to take a seat. The waiting room was quiet, a few chairs, a table with magazines, a plant in the corner. I kept my eyes on the floor, feeling the weight of what I was about to do pressing on my shoulders. Laura Bennett, a voice called. I looked up to see Olivia standing there, a woman in her mid-40s with kind brown eyes and silver streaks in her hair pulled into a neat bun. She wore a navy blazer and had a presence that made me feel like I could breathe again. We followed her into her office, a small room with shelves lined with books, a framed certificate on the wall, and a photo of her with 2 kids at the beach. Please sit, she said, her voice steady. I sat down, twisting my hands in my lap, and Julie sat next to me, giving me a nod. Tell me everything, Olivia said, leaning forward. And I did. I told her about the coffee, about Mark's anger, about the years of fear and control I had tried to ignore. I told her about the call to 911, about the look on Mark's face when the police took him away. She didn't interrupt. She took notes, nodding, asking small questions when she needed details. When I finished, I felt like I had run a marathon, my chest tight, my hands cold. Laura, Olivia said, looking me in the eyes, you did the right thing. Tears burned my eyes again, but I blinked them back. We're going to file for a restraining order immediately, she continued. We'll start your divorce paperwork and we'll work to freeze any joint accounts to protect your assets. I nodded, swallowing hard. Okay. This is going to be a process, Olivia said, but you're not alone in this. For a moment, the weight on my chest felt lighter. I signed papers, listened as she explained each step, and for the first time I felt like I had a plan. When we left her office, the cold Portland air hit my face and I wrapped my coat tighter around me. Julie linked her arm through mine and we walked back to her car. You're so brave, Laura, she said softly. I don't feel brave, I whispered. You are, she replied. You're taking your life back. That evening, I sat on the couch with a blanket draped around me, scrolling through job listings on Julie's laptop. I needed to work. I needed to find a way to stand on my own 2 feet again. A small bookstore downtown had posted a listing for a part-time position, and something about it called to me. I pictured myself surrounded by books, the quiet, the smell of paper, the peace I had longed for. I sent in an application before I could talk myself out of it, closing the laptop with a shaky breath. My phone buzzed on the table and I reached for it, hoping it was a message from Olivia or a job confirmation. But when I looked at the screen, my blood ran cold. A message from Mark. You'll regret it if you don't come home right now. I deleted Mark's message and blocked his number, my hands shaking but my mind clear. For a moment, I stared at the screen, the empty silence of it, feeling the fear rise like a wave. I took a deep breath and set the phone down, pressing my palms against my knees to steady myself. That morning, I started my first shift at the small bookstore downtown. The bell above the door jingled softly as I stepped inside, the scent of paper and coffee wrapping around me like a blanket. The shelves were tall and packed, the floor creaked under my feet, and sunlight streamed through the front window, catching dust motes dancing in the air. Laura Wright. Megan, the owner, smiled warmly as she came from behind the counter. She was in her early 40s with kind eyes and a laugh that felt like a warm cup of tea. Yes, I said, managing a small smile. Come on, I'll show you around, she said, handing me a small apron. We walked through the aisles, her explaining the sections, how to restock, how to gently remind customers about bookmarks at the counter. I listened, taking it all in, feeling a calmness I hadn't felt in years. Around mid-morning, I was sorting a stack of used books when the bell chimed and an older woman stepped inside. She wore a deep green coat, her gray hair tucked into a bun, her eyes sharp but kind. Looking for something specific? I asked, stepping toward her. Just browsing today, dear, she replied, her fingers brushing along the spines of the books. She paused in front of a shelf of memoirs, pulling out a book and glancing at me. Funny thing about stories, they remind us, we can always start again. I looked at her, feeling a lump in my throat. Yeah, I think so too. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. I left a man once years ago. Took me a while to remember who I was, but it was worth it. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes and I blinked them away quickly, offering a small smile. Thank you for sharing that. She patted my arm gently. Don't ever let fear keep you from living, honey. After she left, I stepped into the back room, letting out a shaky breath. I pulled out the small notebook I had started keeping in my purse, flipping to a blank page. I started to write. About the coffee, about the yelling, about the way my hands still shook when I heard loud footsteps. About the bookstore, the smell of paper, the sound of the bell on the door. I wrote until my hand cramped, the words pouring out like they had been waiting for years. When I finished, I felt lighter. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed and my heart stopped for a moment before I saw Olivia's name on the screen. Laura, she said, her voice warm. The court approved your restraining order. Mark is officially not allowed to contact you or come near you. I closed my eyes, pressing my hand to my chest, feeling the weight ease just a little. Thank you, Olivia. You did this, Laura, she said. You're taking your life back. I ended the call, staring at the phone, letting the words settle over me. You're taking your life back. After Olivia's call, I stepped outside the shop for a moment, letting the cold Portland air clear my head. The street was quiet, a few cars passing, the light catching on wet pavement. I closed my eyes and took a breath, feeling a small piece of fear lift from my shoulders. When I stepped back inside, Megan gave me a questioning look from the counter. I managed a small smile and she nodded, saying nothing, giving me the space I didn't know I needed. I went back to restocking, letting the feel of books in my hands soothe the tightness in my chest. Each title felt like a promise, a reminder that new stories were possible. Near closing, the bell above the door jingled again. I looked up to see a young woman, maybe in her 20s, holding the hand of a small boy clutching a worn teddy bear. Can I help you find something? I asked, stepping toward them. She gave me a tired smile. Just something to help him sleep at night. I led them to the children's section, kneeling to show the little boy a book with a soft blue cover and stars across the front. His eyes lit up and he hugged it to his chest. Thank you, the woman said softly, her voice cracking. It's been hard. I met her eyes and nodded. I understand. After they left, I wiped down the counter, the scent of lemon cleaner rising in the warm shop air. I pulled out my notebook again, writing about the small boy and his teddy bear, about the way the woman's eyes looked when she saw him smile. I wrote about how healing can look like holding a book, about how small moments matter. Just as I was locking the front door, my phone buzzed. A message flashed across the screen from an unknown number. It was Sandra. I stared at it, the words blurry, my heart picking up speed. You ruined everything. You tore this family apart. How could you do this to us? I stared at the message, the anger behind the words, the blame. For a moment, guilt twisted in my stomach, the old fear whispering that maybe it was my fault. But I took a breath, pressing delete, blocking the number just like I had with Mark. No more. I would not let them pull me back into that darkness. I locked the door and stepped outside, pulling my coat tighter around me, the sky a soft gray as the streetlights flickered on. I started to walk toward the bus stop, the cold air biting at my cheeks, but each step felt like mine. As I passed the front window of the shop, I glanced back, seeing the warm light inside the shelves lined with stories waiting for someone to find them. Then I saw him. Mark. Standing across the street in the shadows near the corner, his eyes locked on me, red with anger, his hands curled into fists at his sides. Have you ever been in a situation like this? Share in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, the cold no longer touching me as fear rushed through my veins. He took a step forward, and I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I stood still, my hand gripping the edge of the counter as Mark took slow steps toward me. His eyes were locked on mine, dark and furious, his jaw tight as he stepped through the door, letting it slam shut behind him. The small bell above the door jingled, the soft sound at odds with the heavy air that fell over the shop. "Laura," he said, his voice low, too calm, making the hairs on my arms stand up. I didn't move. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat loud in my ears. I glanced toward Megan, who stood near the register, her eyes wide, her hand reaching slowly for the phone. "You need to leave, Mark," I said, keeping my voice steady even though I could feel it shaking under the surface. He let out a laugh, sharp and humorless, stepping closer. "You think you can keep me away? You think a piece of paper is going to stop me?" His eyes darted around the shop, taking in the customers frozen in the aisles, the books stacked on the tables, the quiet that seemed to press in around us. "Mark, you're not supposed to be here," I said again, taking a step back. "You need to come home, Laura," he snapped, slamming his hand down on the counter so hard that a stack of bookmarks fell to the floor. "Enough of this nonsense. You're my wife." My hands tightened on the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. "I'm not going anywhere with you." His face twisted, anger flashing across it, and he slammed his hand down again, harder this time, making the counter rattle. "You're going to ruin everything," he shouted. Megan's voice came from behind me, calm but firm. "Sir, you need to leave or I'm calling the police." Mark's eyes shot to her, and for a moment I saw the fear flash across his face before it disappeared under the rage. "You stay out of this," he shouted, pointing at her. I felt the fear crawling up my spine, but I stood my ground. "Leave, Mark." His eyes snapped back to me, narrowing, and he took another step closer, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "Laura," he hissed, "you're going to regret this." The door behind Mark opened, letting in a gust of cold air, but he didn't move. Megan's hand was steady on the phone, her eyes locked on his as she spoke clearly. "The police are on their way." Mark's head snapped toward her, his face flushing red, a vein pulsing at his temple. "You think you're protecting her, you have no idea what she's done." I took a breath, feeling my hands tremble as I pulled them away from the counter, straightening my back. "Mark, this is your last chance. Leave now." He laughed again, but it was empty, his eyes darting toward the windows where people outside had stopped, watching, their faces pressed against the glass. "You think you're so strong now," he sneered, stepping closer until I could smell the coffee on his breath. "You think you can live without me." I felt the fear, the old fear that used to keep me quiet, that used to keep me in place. But I also felt the burn on my cheek, the shaking hands, the memory of police lights flashing across my living room walls. I said, my voice quiet but firm. "And I will." The bell above the door jingled again, and 2 police officers stepped inside, their hands resting near their belts. "Sir, step away from her," one of them said, his voice calm but leaving no room for argument. Mark turned to them, his hands raised, palms out. "This is my wife. She's confused. We just need to talk." The officer shook his head. "Sir, you are violating a restraining order. Step back now." For a second I saw the panic in Mark's eyes, the realization hitting him that this time it wasn't just between us. This time the law was here and the world was watching. "I just want to talk to her," he shouted, his voice cracking as he slammed his hand on the counter again. "Step back," the officer repeated. Mark's eyes met mine, and I saw the last thread of control slipping from him, the fear underneath the anger. The officers moved forward, taking his arms, turning him, pressing his hands behind his back, as the metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the shop. "Laura, please," he shouted, twisting to look at me as they guided him toward the door. "Please don't do this." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched as they took him out of the shop, the bell jingling softly behind them. The room was quiet, the customers standing frozen, eyes wide, hands over their mouths. Megan came to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You're safe now." I let out a breath. I didn't know I was holding my legs, suddenly weak, my body shaking as the adrenaline drained from me. "Thank you," I whispered, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. The customers slowly returned to their shopping, the quiet hum of the shop coming back to life. Megan gave me a soft smile before going to straighten the bookmarks that had fallen to the floor. I pulled out my phone, sending a quick text to Julie. "It's over. He's gone." Her reply came back almost immediately. "I'm proud of you. Come by tonight if you need a quiet place." I slipped the phone into my pocket, looking around the small bookstore, the place that had become my safe haven, the place where I had found pieces of myself again. Have you ever been in a situation like this? Share in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, the quiet of Julie's guest room around me, the hum of the heater filling the space. I lifted my hand, placing it gently against my cheek, the spot where the burn had long since faded, but the memory remained. I met my own eyes in the mirror, the fear, the strength, the truth, all there. "I choose myself," I whispered. And for the first time in years, I believed it. That morning felt different, no fear, only freedom as the sun rose. I watched the pale light stretch across the small kitchen in Julie's house while I sipped coffee, the steam curling in the cold air. It was the first morning in a long time that I didn't feel the heaviness pressing on my chest. I slipped my phone from my pocket and opened Olivia's email again, reading the words that made everything feel real. "Your divorce papers have been filed." Mark had tried to fight it, leaving voicemails that Olivia handled, his anger no longer reaching me directly. I didn't listen to his words anymore. Olivia was a shield I never knew I needed, and she told me to focus on building my life, letting her handle the noise. That afternoon, I walked up the narrow steps to the small studio apartment I had found near the bookstore. The walls were empty, the hardwood floors cold, but it was mine. I set the small box I was carrying down, looking around, seeing the light streaming through the large window that overlooked the street below. I imagined mornings drinking coffee here, nights reading by the lamp in the corner. I went back down to my car, bringing in my books, a small plant Julie had gifted me, and the faded quilt my mother had made when I went off to college. Each trip up the stairs felt like a step away from the life I left behind. That evening, I sat on the floor with a slice of pizza on a paper plate, the lamp casting a warm glow on the boxes around me. It was quiet, and I felt the quiet fill me, healing parts I didn't know needed healing. I found a small yoga studio a block away, tucked between a bakery and a flower shop. The first class, I was nervous, my body stiff as I moved through each pose, but the instructor's soft voice guided us through, reminding us to breathe, to let go. After class, I stepped outside, the air crisp against my skin, and I felt a lightness that was new, a hope I had thought was gone. Back at the apartment, I opened a notebook, writing down everything I was feeling, the fear, the strength, the small joys of each day. Writing felt like letting air into a room that had been closed off for too long. Have you ever found yourself starting over in ways you never expected? Share in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. I closed the notebook and looked around the small apartment, the soft lamplight touching the corners of the room, making it feel warm, making it feel like home. And for the first time, I was excited to see what tomorrow would bring. The next morning, I woke up to the soft light filling my small apartment. I stretched, feeling the warmth of the quilt around me, the quiet of the room comforting. I brewed a cup of coffee, letting the scent fill the space, and stood by the window watching people pass below, living their lives. For the first time in so long, I felt like I was living mine too. After work at the bookstore, I found myself drawn to the small cafe across the street, the one with chipped tables and mismatched chairs. I ordered a tea, sat by the window, and opened my notebook. I started writing about the day I left, about the coffee, the yelling, the shaking fear that once ruled me. I wrote about the small moments of peace I found since, about the first morning I woke up without fear, about how silence can heal. Writing became my therapy, a place to leave the pieces of the past that no longer belonged to me. One evening, Julie stopped by, bringing me a small plant for the windowsill and a hug that made my chest tighten. "You look lighter," she said, placing the plant down. "I feel lighter," I replied, smiling as I wiped down the small table. We talked about the bookstore, the customers I had helped, the older woman who came in for mysteries every week, the little boy who now waved at me through the glass on his way to school. Julie looked at me, her eyes soft. "You're building something beautiful here." "I hope so," I whispered. Later that week during my yoga class, as I lay on my mat in the soft glow of the studio lights, the instructor's voice guided us to focus on one word: strength. The word settled in my chest, warm and steady, as I breathed deeply, letting the tension in my shoulders fade. After class, I stayed behind, rolling up my mat slowly, watching the others leave, their faces calm, their movements soft. The instructor, a woman with kind eyes and a quiet presence, approached me. "You're doing well, Laura." "Thank you," I said, my voice small but certain. "It's not easy to start over," she said, touching my shoulder lightly. "But you're here, that's enough." I nodded, tears gathering, but not falling. That night, I went home and opened a blank page on my laptop, starting a blog. I titled it Finding Light, and I wrote my first post about leaving, about fear, about the quiet victories of each day. When I hit publish, my hands trembled, but it was a good kind of trembling, the kind that comes with choosing yourself. Have you ever had to rebuild your life from the ground up? Share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. A week later, I found myself sitting in a small therapy room, the soft hum of a heater in the background, a warm mug in my hands. My therapist, a calm woman named Karen, listened as I spoke, letting the words spill out, not rushing me, not judging. And it was there in that quiet room, as I looked at the reflection of myself in the window, that I realized something. "I'm not a victim anymore," I whispered. Karen smiled, gently nodding. "No, Laura. You're a survivor." And for the first time, I believed it. I opened my laptop, and the blank page didn't scare me anymore. It felt like hope. The cursor blinked, waiting, but for once I wasn't afraid of what would come out. I took a deep breath, letting the morning light from my window wash over me as I placed my fingers on the keys. It had been 3 weeks since Olivia called to tell me the divorce was finalized. I kept a part of our savings, my name on my own account, no longer tied to Mark or his choices. It was done. Mark was sentenced to probation, required to take anger management classes, and barred from contacting me again. The restraining order was now permanent. Sandra never reached out again after that last message I ignored. It was like they all vanished, leaving a quiet in my life I didn't know I needed. I started working longer shifts at the bookstore, taking in the peaceful rhythm of shelving books and helping customers find stories to take home. Every paycheck felt like a small victory, a reminder that I could stand on my own 2 feet. In the evenings, I would sit with my laptop, opening my blog, reading the comments that came in from women across the country. They shared stories of fear, of hope, of leaving. Some thanked me for giving them courage, others just needed to be heard, to know they weren't alone. Each message felt like a hand reaching out, connecting to the piece of me that once thought no one could ever understand. "Thank you for sharing your story," one message read. "I finally told my sister what's happening, and she's helping me leave." Another said, "Your words gave me the push I needed. I'm moving out tomorrow." I would read them, tears sometimes blurring my eyes, a quiet gratitude filling my chest. I wasn't alone, and neither were they. One evening, as I closed my laptop, I looked around my small apartment, seeing the books stacked neatly, the plant Julie gave me thriving by the window, the quiet peace of my own space. I whispered to myself, I made it. And I knew deep in my bones that this was only the beginning. The idea for a book came to me one evening as I sipped tea by the window. I had just finished replying to a message from a woman in Texas who told me she left her husband after reading my blog. Her courage lit something in me, reminding me why I started writing in the first place. I opened a new document and typed the title at the top. The Awakening. The words felt right, like a promise to myself and every woman who had ever felt trapped and afraid. I started outlining chapters, moments from my life. I was ready to share pieces of pain and pieces of hope woven together. The morning Mark threw coffee at my face. The first night I slept in Julie's guest room. The day I stood in court signing papers that freed me. The sunrise in my small apartment reminded me I was still here, still standing. Each chapter was a step toward reclaiming my story, not as a victim, but as a survivor. At the bookstore, Megan noticed the change in me. One morning, as we unpacked a box of new arrivals, she glanced at me with a smile. You seem lighter, Laura, she said, handing me a stack of fiction to shelve. I feel lighter, I replied, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. She paused, looking at me with kind eyes. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. That afternoon during my break, I sat in the backroom, notebook open, writing ideas for my book. I didn't rush. I let the words come as they wanted, letting my heart guide the story. Sometimes tears would slip down my cheek, but they weren't tears of fear anymore. They were tears of release, of gratitude for the chance to start over. One morning I woke up early, the light spilling into my apartment as birds sang outside. I made coffee, wrapping my hands around the warm mug, standing by the window as I watched the world wake up. I thought of all the mornings I used to wake in fear, the weight of Mark's anger pressing down on me, the silence that felt like suffocation. And now there was only peace. Have you ever felt the freedom of a new beginning? Share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. I took a sip of coffee, the warmth spreading through me, and smiled. I was free. And for the first time, I was ready to live, not just survive. What would you do if you were me? Maybe it's time you choose yourself too.